Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurunritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Ajnulambita Bhujo Anagavadato Sankirtanaika Pitaro Amalaya Daksho Vishwambaro Dvijavaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Godadai Pushpavanto Chitro Samdota Monono Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charano Sabo Dukkado Paramanando Sundaro Subhapriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopika Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Sapta Kanchan Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Krishna Sute Devi Anamami Hari Priye Shri Bhaktivinoda Parivar ki Jai Gauriya Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki Jai Ananta Gauriya Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai Gaur Nityananda ki Jai Gaur Premanande. Well, good evening, everyone. We have been discussing the significance of the Rath Yatra, having been invited, as we were, over the previous weekend. But as per the schedule, we've been asked to open the evenings for questions. And so we'll ask for questions, and then tomorrow we'll continue the discussion, hopefully come to some conclusion of that eternal pastime. So, questions? Yes. Dignity.
So I'm wondering about the Sukhada and both the covered Sukhada and lots like the Sukhada and Paramananda.
You're referring to the verse, Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charano Sako Sukhado Paramanando. Is that what you're referring to? Subala.
Also the cover in Circle of Friends in the Lila section. And supplying Krishna with yogurt and rice.
What about him?
Like wondering about him.
That's something to wonder about. It's wonderful. So, this I know somebody named Sukhada, friend of mine, actually, and friend of yours too. But Sukhada means who gives happiness. So, and it is aside from what I just mentioned, it is a name for one of the cowherd friends of Krishna. It's mentioned in the what is that book? With all the names. No, Gopal. I forget. It was there was a translation of a text, a Bengali text, Preyo Bhakti Rasarnava, some years ago by a godbrother of mine named Dasara Sutta, who happened to just find it, who happens to be, of course, a disciple of Prabhupada and happened to be interested in Sakya Rasa and came across this manuscript. We translated the manuscript. It's been translated again into English by another godbrother of mine in recent times named Swami. It's been published a couple of times. It's quite a good seller, apparently. It's one now of two books, a third which hasn't been published, about Sakiras that have been surfaced. Excuse me, surfaced in really in the context of the wave of that bhava that was set in motion by Prabhupada's campaign, empowered as he was for the keen spiritual and rasic insight of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, empowered by the Manitananda Vesh, and idealizing as such the ideal of fraternal love of Krishna. This is the wave of Prabhupada, the internal wave, if you will, behind the campaign of Prabhupada. It's said in Chaitanya Charitamrita that no one can be successfully spread the Sankirtan without Krishna Shakti. Krishna Shakti vine nahi. So what is the Shakti? He was successful, right? Prabhupada in Sankirtan, worldwide Sankirtan, a great tidal wave of Sankirtan. Right? So what was the Shakti behind that? And the very astute, as I mentioned, and deeply internal perspective of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj was Sakyabhav, this wave of this. And this, of course, no one embodies it more than Nityananda Prabhu. So his avesh, his empowerment. It's a long story, and I've told it a number of times in a number of different ways, as most of you are familiar with. And Prabhupada himself attested to that, of course, in his prayer and on many other occasions, if you paid attention. And the fact is, not too many paid attention, but I was fortunate to pay attention. And Sridhar Maharaj helped me to pay even keener attention to that. And so, as a result, we published a short book some time ago entitled Oh My Friends, where many of those details are found about Prabhupada's inner life, his ideal, and so forth. So anyway, the other two books, Preyo Bhakti Prasarnava, of course, is the one I said, one of two, and a third, which is yet to be published. The second, in our time, of course, is Circle of Friends. And there's a third book called Sakya Pranay that I've written, and it's hasn't been published yet. It's a small book, but it's a book that centers on a particular fact. It's of interest to me and hopefully to others, which is that unlike the other Braj rasas, Krishna's childhood, his Kumar, his Poganda, his boyhood, and his Kishore, his adolescence, all three are udipanas, or excitements for Sakirasa. It's just an interesting fact, worth a book, worth writing a little book about. So I've done that, and but I don't know when I'll publish it. But anyway, this is one of three, and Bhakti, Preyo, or Sarnava. Anyway, to make a long story short, to get to the point, if you will, and beginning to answer your question, at the end of that book, he added an appendix from another book, and I don't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but it lists like 108 or more names of Krishna's cowherd friends. There's many, many more than that. There's an unlimited number, but Sukhada is one of the names there. So, but there's more than one Sukhada. Okay, friends of Krishna. So it's a name. It means who gives happiness, and other than that, Sukha means happiness, and Ananda means happiness, both. But in the verse that I cited, this is a verse that was composed, I believe, if I recall correctly, by Prabhupada, maybe with help of Vrindaranya. That was the Pranam verse. But then this verse, Vande Ham Sri Ramakrishna, who composed that one? Wasn't you? Okay, it must have been me. But it's grammatically correct, so that's a wonder. But um, in the verse, it says, well, there's a couple of ways to read it, but Vandeham Shri Ram, Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna. So I offered my self to Ramakrishna. Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charano Sako, at whose feet one becomes fearless. That is, if you put Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charano Sako, what did we say? Charana Saka, then I think it would mean I offer my obeisances to Ram and Krishna, who's, what do we say? Who's, really refers to Prabhupada. We put it in Saka in the singular. Anyway, and there's that verse arose out of a dream that I had. A dream and a visitation from Prabhupada. And I asked him a question, and he gave me he answered in a very interesting and indirect way, but made himself clear nonetheless. So the verse arose out of that dream. And but in the third line, it says, Vandeham Sri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charana Sako Paramanando. Well, I thought you were referring to that, but you're not. But Sukha means happiness, Paramananda means the supreme happiness. So Sukha sometimes can also be used just for ordinary happiness, whereas Ananda more typically refers to spiritual happiness. What to speak of Paramananda? That is obviously speaking about the supreme happiness. Actually, it can also, in that regard, there's another verse that comes to mind, and that is spoken by Brahma. Oho bhagyam, nanda gopa bhajopasam, yan mitram paramanandam, puna brahma sanatanam. There's many ways in that this verse has been looked at by our acharyas, but in one such perspective on the verse, Jiva Goswami has said, yan mitram paramanandam. He says the friendship is the supreme ananda. It's a verse about the friendship that everyone in Braj has for Krishna. One time, forgive me, but that's what I'm like. One time, a godbrother of mine who had spent a lot of time with Bon Maharaj, Bhakti Hridaya Bon Maharaj, a godbrother of Prabhupada, in Prabhupada's absence, when Prabhupada was overseas in the Americas, he was in India, and he had an association with Bon Maharaj. Later, he came back to associate with Prabhupada when Prabhupada returned and so forth. He had a conversation with Prabhupada, and he asked Prabhupada, is everyone, all of our charges in Manjari Bhav, which is not a typical kind of question that probably one of Prabhupada's disciples in ISKCON would ask, because you can count the number of times that Prabhupada ever said the word Manjari, probably on, like this, on none of your fingers. But doesn't mean he was against it or didn't know about it, but it was more readily it would surface in amongst its godbrothers in their mosques and so on, as the ideal, the highest ideal of the Vaishnavism. So he asked Prabhupada this question, and he told me this too, personally. And he said, is everyone in Gaudiya, everyone in Gaudiya Sampradaya, their ideal is Manjari Bhav? So he was trying to get Prabhupada to say some things along the lines of things that he heard from Bon Maharaj, higher topics and so forth, which Prabhupada was a little more close-lipped about. And I mean, you have to understand that Prabhupada was speaking to people like me. We were hippies and largely, and it's a little different if you're speaking to somebody from even a poor boy from Bangladesh, or to speak of some university boy or girl, if they were a man or woman, which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mission tended to gather. Uh, so we were talking about Kinchana Krishnadas Babaji, one of Prabhupada's governors, the other night, just briefly. He was a college track star, track running in university. So these were persons who were not just necessarily. Many of them were born in Bengali Vaishnava families. Even they weren't from Bangladesh. Uh, some of them were, but they were. Many of them were for the university. They were educated people, and it wasn't that popular, let's say, for educated people to be joining Gaudiya Vaishnavism at the time for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was that the spiritual vitality of Gaudiya Vaishnavism was on the wane, as Krishna describes in the Gita, evam paramparam praptamimam vinagreshu aparinamata yoganashta. But this happens just by the influence of time, right? And then it's the movement, the vitality of his teaching is again um, um, revived through the system of parampara. Somebody wrote me just yesterday and asked that that someone was writing a PhD thesis, and it had something to do with this ISKCON or something like that. And he was asking that is there any scriptural evidence or reference to support the idea that that you need to have a guru present rather than this idea that we call it Ritvik, which has become popular in some circles. That after the passing of Prabhupada, that there are no qualified gurus. So, who says who, but so, based on that premise, then we should just officially kind of initiate on behalf of Prabhupada. And then there's no, so I guess the guy was dealing with the author who was dealing with something to do with that controversy. And so some other person asked me on his behalf. I don't even know his name, but I know the person who asked me at any rate. So, I just said, well, Bhagavad Gita says it right there. That if as you're proposing, there was a problem in the vitality, the spiritual vitality of the parampara, because this really refers not to the Gaudiya Vaishnava parampara, but to ISKCON and the parampara, or the line of which there are many, that runs through Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhakti Vinod, Bhaktisiddhanta to Prabhupada, persons like myself, and so in ISKCON as an institution, to this day. It's not like the only Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara in the world, right? But they sometimes some of the members of big organizations can have more of an insular, perspective. So anyway, I quoted Bhagavad Gita. I said, well, there it is. If you're saying that the line has lost some spiritual vitality with the passing of Prabhupada, then the Gita says exactly what to do. Get another one. I mean, that's parampara means one after another. So if you're saying the solution is stop the parampara, then they're directly contradicting what Krishna says in the Gita. The way to bring the spiritual vitality is that the parampara must go on. Look for it. Krishna says he continues it. To look for it, wherever you look for it, wherever you can find it. Right? If you don't think it's here, then look over there. That's the teaching, right? Now that's not to say that it isn't there. That may be a misconception to begin with, right? By some members of ISKCON who've developed this Ritvik philosophy. Now, how did I get to that? tangent. Um,
Yeah.
right, yeah. So, what is it? So, yeah. Anyway, I missed a slight link there, but bear with me. Uh, so, um, yeah, I was talking about the fact that uh, um, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was able to attract educated people, and Gaudiya Vaishnavism at the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was not very vital, spiritually vital, um, and there was a lot of misrepresentation and so forth. So this is one of the reasons why it wasn't popular amongst educated people. Um, Bhaktivinoda characterized it in poems by saying things like, if a Gaudiya would come to your door begging, and the householder would say, oh, who's at the door? And the servant would say, oh, to Gaudiya. Oh, we'll give him some rice and send him away. There's nothing we can learn from them, but anyway, give him some rice. This was a sign of the lack of vitality, spiritual vitality. So on that account, it wasn't so attractive to educated people. Plus, educated people were getting a view of the modern world and had the opportunity to choose between traditional perspective and a modern perspective, which was now at the doorstep, right, of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and couldn't be ignored. I said the Goswamis could ignore the heliocentric perspective because of their own Radha-centric perspective. Their heads were going round and round, but it came to the doorstep of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in Calcutta, right? Bhakti Vinod was there as the seventh Goswami to deal with it, right? To deal with modernity. But but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's campaign, following in the spirit of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, it had a modern, sensibility to it. He employed modern things like vehicles. He wore patent leather shoes uh, instead of going barefoot and walking everywhere, which would be the traditional um, um, mode of transport, if you will, for the sadhus. It was controversial. But then educated people who were turning a little bit towards modernity and thinking maybe it had some values, they found it attractive. There was an English lady who wrote a famous letter back to her friends and said, and there's one sadhu here, he's different. So she's referring to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And she said, he even uses a British toilet. Wow. So meanwhile, at the same time, Gandhi's movement was capturing the attention of the educated young people. So for Bhaktisiddhanta, in the midst of that, to come in and attract educated people, it implies that he had some spiritual force standing, right? Those were uh, big wins. Lack of vitality in the tradition itself, the face of modernity and the West. And then what about Swaraj in the political sense of the term? Liberation, freedom from the British. I mean, these were huge currents. And to step into the middle of that and pull out a university student like Prabhupada, like Sridhar Maharaj, like uh, Ban Maharaj, like Krishnadas Babaji, when they wrote in the Harmonist, Bhakti Vinod Thakur had a magazine called Sajjana Toshini, so for the pleasure of the gentle people, Sajjana Toshini. Um, of course, Bhaktisiddhanta said, this world is no place for a gentle man or woman. So he was talking about people who have maybe some interest in another world should read this magazine, Sajjana Toshini. So Bhaktisiddhanta gave it a modern name, the English name, and he reincarnated it, if you will, or yeah, they call it the Harmonist. And in the Harmonist, he had his lettered men and women who had degrees writing articles, and they would write the articles, pen the articles in their secular names, MBA or PhD afterwards, and so forth, to bring in the minds of educated people, well, to demonstrate that educated persons with educations were writing this. They weren't just villagers, let's say. So anyway, it was um, an interesting time for Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And so in the Gaudiya Math, after the passing of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, then you had Ban Maharaj, started Mishran, and Keshav Maharaj, and Madhav Maharaj, and Tirtha Maharaj, and Sridhar Maharaj, and so forth. And within India, they had their different maths, and it was typical that a disciple of Ban Maharaj would say, and Sridhar Maharaj, my Siksha Guru, and Keshav Maharaj, my Siksha Guru, and Madhav Maharaj, my Siksha Guru, and then a disciple of Madhav Maharaj would say the same about others. And they had this kind of camaraderie amongst themselves, picking up where the great Gaudiya Math kind of left off. And there was some disruption, and how the leadership would, and the mission would continue was in question. And there were people struck out on their own in different ways to try to represent, but there was a kind of a core. It reminds, well, I'll go to that. It reminds me. We had a core like that once too. But so the disciples that they were making from India were different than the disciples that Prabhupada was making, right? You know, at the what's it called? Yeah, Matchless Gifts, but I was thinking of that concert hall in San Francisco. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, those kind of events. So, you know, I'm just saying that Prabhupada was a little more tight-lipped about more esoteric topics, and it seemed would be appropriate given the audience. That doesn't mean in any way, shape, or form that his audience was in any way barred or had less access to what something like Manjari Bhav really means, the feeling, to catch it, to imbibe it, and so forth. You could write a whole book, and have been books all about Raganuga Bhakti from so many different angles. I mean, it's really quite a simple thing. You have to worship Radha and Krishna, which of course we did, and Prabhupada installed the deities and so forth. And you do Nam Sankirtan with the ideal in mind of attaining the Braja Leela. I mean, everybody in ISKCON thought you should go to Vrindavan and live for eternally there. It was their ideal, right? So they kept practicing. They would get a taste, and suddenly the taste, in time, I should say, the taste would be driving their services, their movements, and so forth. Rather than, we're doing this because the book says we should, and it sounds like a good idea, it makes sense, and it's the right thing to do. Which is, how can you start before that? I mean, it's pretty much, you have to start with that, right? If you start with that, it's kind of dutifully engaging in the service based on philosophy, based on also just the fondness for Prabhupada that we had. Want to be like him, right? Remember when I was on my way to Jamaica with my wife, and pregnant wife, to live in the hills and meditate. And I, it's such a long story, but I'll make it short. We had stopped at a crash pad, as we used to call them. People had their homes open, you know, just come and crash there. And it was New Year's Eve. It happened to be New Year's Eve. So because we were able to crash there, I went out and begged some vegetables, and we cooked like a vegetable stew. No spices, but we had salt, pepper, maybe, you know. And for the people who had hosted us, and then brought it to them, and they said, you know, we only eat raw food. And okay, well, sorry about that. You know, I tried. And then it was New Year's Eve, so they were sitting around the table, and they were all kind of like morose. And I asked them what they were so morose about. And they said, "Well, another year has gone by, and we haven't become enlightened." Okay. Meanwhile, I had this whole like backpack full of every book about meditation that you could possibly find. And I was going to Jamaica to meditate, and I was chant Om Hari Om, Om Hari Om, Om Hari Om, and Hare Krishna. I found Hare Krishna on the back of a package of incense and said, "Chant this mantra, and your life will be sublime." I had seen the devotees at Woodstock, but I didn't get it. They didn't approach me, and I need to talk to them. I saw them dancing through the crowd and chanting. But I thought, well, these guys are pretty morose. I have a more optimistic perspective. And and I said as much, and they said, "Oh." I looked on the bookshelf and I saw this big fat book, and it said KRSNA Krishna. Oh, that's been the mantra that I chant. So I looked at that book and I said, "Hey, what's this book?" Oh, that's what you need, they said. That's what you need. Well, so I said, okay. So they actually gave me the book. And then they said, the Krishna people are over here. They were in Coconut Grove in Miami. So we went there, and then we walked into the temple, and who later would be, who was one of my godbrothers later after I got initiated, was giving a class. Just came just at the end of the class. And he said, when he was talking about, he had just come back from Los Angeles, and where he had spent time with Prabhupada. That was his headquarters. And he was talking just for a minute or 30 seconds about Prabhupada. He would make the garland for Prabhupada, and it was just so attractive to me, just to hear him talk about having a figure like that in one's life. And then he ended the class and said, and Prabhupada said that if you once bow down and pray to Krishna, "Krishna, please help me," he will help you. And I bowed down and I said, "Krishna, please help me." And sincerely, so forth. And then they went out on Sankirtan for New Year's Eve. So they took me out, two of us out. We did Sankirtan, handed out, they gave me the service of giving out Back to God in magazines, to sing and know my future or something. Right. So, but we had a ticket to Jamaica, so off we went. But how do we get there? Bhakti, yeah.
Saying it's simple.
Yeah, it's simple. No. Anyway, so many stories come to mind. I hope you don't mind sharing them with you. But I was saying that anyway, that Prabhupada's disciples weren't, because he didn't talk about Manjari Bhav per se, were not barred from attaining it. He gave all the practices. He gave the simplicity of that. If you chant Hare Krishna, do Sankirtan, with the ideal of obtaining Krishna in Vrindavan, that's Raganuga Bhakti, maybe Ajata Ruchi, Raganuga, before the taste comes, but that's your ideal. Then, in due course, the taste will come, right? Then naturally, spontaneously, you will engage. So, anyway, missed a link there, but Prabhupada then responded to my godbrother who asked him, "Is everybody, all the acharyas in Manjari Bhav?" Which wasn't a typical question, as I'm saying, that Prabhupada's disciples would ask. But he had been hearing from Bon Mars, and that was more of that topic would come up more readily amongst a different audience, right? And so, but Prabhupada replied, "Down to Sakya," which is very peculiar. And of course, Vrindavan is the land of Sakya in one sense, because Sakya Rasa, it touches the Dasya, it touches Madhurya, and it also touches Vatsalya, and it also touches Madhurya. And then it's there unto itself, so to speak, as well. So these are the four bhavas of Braj: Dasya, Vatsalya, Sakya, and Madhurya. So it's all pervading in that sense. In Brahma's verse, Aho Bhagyam, Aho Bhagyam. How lucky are the people of Braj? because Krishna has become their friend. It has an extended meaning and and more of a specific meaning. So the extended meaning is that, like I say, it's the land of friendship. What do I mean by that in another sense? Here in Goloka, we find something that we don't find in Vaikuntha. And in one sense, it begins with friendship. And then it goes to Vatsalya. Both of those things are not in Vaikuntha. Narayan does not have a mother and a father. He doesn't have a body to wrestle with, and so forth. So these bhavas are not manifest there. And if you look at, there's two ways of looking at the hierarchy: Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, or you can say Dasya, Vatsalya, Sakya, Madhurya. There's good reasoning for either perspective. But at any rate, if we take Rupa Goswami's hierarchy as he gives it, even while he says it could be looked at another way, in Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu, he gives it Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya. Then we can say Sakya begins here, down to Sakya. It means our sampradaya is a rag sampradaya. It's taking us to Braj. This is a simple way that Prabhupada is speaking about it. And that verse of Brahma speaks about it in a general way. This is the land of Sakya in that sense. Of course, the other way to look at it is Golok Vrindavan is centered on Madhurya. That's obviously true as well. And we'll hear more about that when we finish our discussion on Rath Yatra tomorrow. But the verse of Brahma is Ahobhagyam, Ahobhagyam, Nanda Gopa Yan Mitram, Paramanandam, Purna Brahma Sanatanam. It also has a more specific meaning, and that's brought out by the commentators, and it pertains to Brahma's own ideal that was fixed up at the time of his initiation. There it's mentioned that and several commentators have said at this point Krishna has offered him love and friendship, acknowledged his desire for friendship, for Sakyabhav. They use the exact terms. So it's kind of, in one sense, then, from an aesthetic point of view, from a rasic point of view, the center of Brahma's prayers. From a philosophical point of view, of course, Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam, there's a famous verse in there, in those prayers, where Brahma describes Narayan as an Amsa of Krishna, and this is a verse that Krishnadas Kaviraj draws upon in his second chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it's establishing this point, Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam, an important point without which there's no Goloka, right? We made this point again and again. If Krishna is not the source of Narayan, then there's no Goloka, because that means Krishna is an avatar of Narayan, appears in the material world for the Prakat Leela, the manifest Leela, then goes back into Narayan, and whoever follows him ends up also in Vaikuntha, right? But if Krishna is the source of Narayan, then he has his own abode. And those Leelas that he displays, like Vatsalya, Madhurya, and Sakya, they have a corresponding place. This is what the whole second canto of Brihad Bhagavatamrita is about. When Uttara asks, wow, this is fascinating. Narad has showcased the virtues of Braj Rasa and Gopi Bhav in particular. Where do you find that? Is there any, where does that take place? And then the whole second canto, that's called Golok Mahatmya, the glories of Golok. There's a place corresponds with it. It all fits together, obviously, with Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam. So from a philosophical point, his prayers center on this, but from an aesthetic point of view, his own bhava, Brahma, is Sakyabhav. So the verse speaks, when we look at it in that way, it's speaking specifically about the virtues of Sakyabhav and Jiva Goswami. When he looks at it like that, he says, and Paramananda means here that Sakyabhav is the highest bliss.
Lucky Bob is the highest goal and it froze. Bummer.